Hello, welcome back to Oh God, What Now? The original independent politics podcast, still alive and kicking after 5 prime ministers, 2 general elections, 1 pandemic, and so many political frenemy podcasts that we've lost count. I'm Andrew Harrison. Big shout out to everybody who signed up as a Patreon backer after our gentle reminder last week. We depend on you lovely supporters to keep going more than ever these days, and every new supporter is worth their weight in gold. The podcast industry is getting a bit tougher since big media discovered it, and you may have noticed we've had to run a few more ads than usual just to stand still. So if you don't want to hear loads of adverts and you do want to help us stay free and independent, please do think about pledging just £3 or £5 a month. It is really valuable to us. Just follow the link in the show notes or search Patreon Oh God What Now to find out how you can help. Okay, on today's show, how have Kemi, Badenoch and Robert Jenrick emerged as frontrunners, and where would they take the Conservatives if they won? Plus, Israel, Hamas, Iran, Lebanon and Yemen has the assassination of Hezbollah leader Hassan Nasrallah weakened Iran's self-described axis of resistance. And are we any closer to the end of the bloodshed? To talk about all this, I'm joined by 2 of our esteemed regulars. Yasmin Sahan is Foreign Affairs Correspondent for Time and now a naturalised British citizen, which seems like out of the frying pan and into the fire to me, but whatever. Hello, Yasmin. How are you?
Hello, mate. No, I can't do it still. No, it doesn't matter if I'm British
mate.
or not.
Yes,
hello, mate. I tried. Hi.
Are you now agonising about putting the milk into your tea first and apologising to people when they bump into you?
All that, yes, and even worse, all I do is talk about the weather now.
All right, that's it.
I'm fully in it.
But back in the old country, the first and only debate between vice presidential candidates J.D. Vance and Tim Walz is on Tuesday night in New York. It's 2 Midwesterners in the big city. What are we expecting from the conversation between America's dad and America's asshole brother-in-law who keeps ruining Thanksgiving by talking about woke?
Well, I think in keeping with the sort of theme of the U.S. election so far, I think it's going to be weird. But for a more astute analysis, I'm borrowing from my colleague Philip Elliott, who put in his curtain raiser of the debate that the evening stands to be a high-stakes distillation of the culture wars, largely defining this national contest, with nasty digs referencing childless cat ladies, tampons in boys' bathrooms, and pet hunting Haitians flying across the stage from the start. So, yeah. I think,
and then Tim Walz would just go, come on, really?
And I mean, I do plan on watching it principally because I was actually on holiday in Italy when the last debate between Harris and Trump happened. And I still have not brought myself to actually watch it because I just, I was like, I think I heard enough. When I heard the
horrible debate, lovely bowl of linguine. What
exactly.
would it be?
Yeah. I was like, it's not a hard decision. I don't think, and I certainly, in all the presidential contests that I've been able to vote in, I can't think of too many that were decided by the VP candidates themselves. However, given how close this contest is, particularly in the battleground states, and given the fact that these 2 men, I think, are still pretty unknown quantities, I mean, certainly, among like kind of most Americans, I do think that this could be a pretty important debate insofar as to just see like who else is out here. Like we've seen who the candidates are. We've been introduced to them. They're more familiar.
Yeah. Who
are the 2 men that are going to be assisting them? And I think partly because it's so close and because there's more attention on them that they faced probably the most scrutiny that VP candidates have faced since at least like Sarah Palin.
Well, it's like last time around, it was possible to say of Kamala Harris as VP, she's just one heartbeat away from the presidency.
Right.
But now it's Vance, isn't it? Because he's the guy who's the wingman for the ancient guy.
Precisely, yeah. And he doesn't, I mean, he's not, we knew about Hillbilly Elegy. He doesn't have a massive record on which to kind of look back on, apart from the fact that he used to criticize Trump, but now he doesn't.
Well, I'm stirring up Hillbilly Allergy for my headline for this one when it finally happens. Also with us, it's political columnist, author of A History of the World in 47 Borders, and Doctor Who fan so learned that he even knows about my fanzine that I did when I was 13 years old. It's John Elledge. Hello, John.
Hello. Am I right in thinking you named it after an evil cactus?
Yeah, I did, yeah. We had spiky opinions.
That's a choice.
It's a choice. John, the Canterbury MP, Rosie Duffield, has just quit Labour over the weekend over the party's stance on the 2-child benefit, the Winterfield thing, and cabinet members' acceptance of gifts from donors. She said Starmer was unfit to be Prime Minister. Rosie Duffield has been semi-detached from Labour for some time. She didn't get a lot of support from the party over her gender-critical position on trans issues. But why quit now? It seems a bit early to be condemning the whole project.
Well, thank you, Andrew, for presenting me with this live rail at the start of the show before I've said anything. It does seem odd timing, doesn't it? Because it's not just that it's so early in the government when this is all going to be forgotten in a few months. I mean, like the last few weeks have not been great scandal-wise, but this is probably not the thing that's going to move the dial in 28, 29 when we come to an election. And also, she did it the weekend of Tory conference, but attack the party from the left doesn't seem to be the sort who's going to defect to the Conservative Party.
Yeah.
So it immediately, like it happened on Saturday, and then immediately got buried by stuff coming out of the Tories. It seems very strange. So all I can think of is that she genuinely, for whatever reason, she actually means it. She's genuinely upset about these things. I suspect that maybe she does kind of feel personally let down by the leadership, which is not to say that, you know, she's correct about anything, but I can imagine that she feels she's not been defended, even if they've moved towards her in policy terms. And maybe she just reached the end of her tether, which is not to express sympathy with her, but that's the only explanation I can think of, really.
Yeah, it's not like she's going to leave the party, attack it from the left, and then wander into the Greens when she's got baggage. Yeah,
and she's not going to join up with Jeremy Corbyn and his little independent group, is she? So the only thing that makes sense is like everything she wrote in the letter is, from her mind at least, sincere.
The Conservatives have gathered in Birmingham to try and work out a path to relevance. We've all done it. And to continue the endless process of whittling down the 4 remaining leadership candidates to 2. It's already going about as well as you can imagine. James cleverly has told Tories that if they want to get power back, they need to stop behaving like bloody children. Liz Truss has blamed the media, the Bank of England and economic illiteracy for the failure of her well-remembered mini-budget. And Kemi Badenoch reached out to working mums all over the nation by saying that maternity pay had gone too far and was a form of taxation. So far, so crazy. But whatever happens in Birmingham, it's looking like either Badenoch or Robert Jenrick in the final vote, which appropriately is happening on Halloween. Which direction will they take the party in, and would it matter? John, you're a political conference veteran who very pointedly isn't going to this one. What is
It's
your...
not that pointed. I mean, I don't think it's like...
It's not a conference without Ellage, man.
Yeah, I don't think it's actually a sign for like the political health of the Conservative Party that I've decided not to go to the conference this year. It is just literally that no one would pay me to do it. And I've done 2 and I'm tired.
Okay, fair enough. All right, yeah. But from a distance, from the Ellage command armchair, what's your assessment of this one? I mean, what's going to happen? Is it just a purely symbolic exercise at this time?
I mean, to a certain extent, Tory conference is always symbolic exercises. Yeah. Like there is kind of a sliding scale of how much conference matters in terms of setting policy. With like, you know, the Lib Dems are incredibly democratic. They do decide on policy, which the leadership may then ignore should it go into coalition. But, you know, that is a thing. That is how where they write the manifesto. Labour, debates on the conference floor matter a bit less. Tories, it's just a rally. That is all it ever is. It's a less important rally than usual because they're not in government. It does kind of feel oddly quiet, even though they are in the middle of this leadership election. It does kind of feel like we're not hearing from them as much as we would normally expect to this week of the year.
Yeah, and Badenoch is definitely expanding to fill in the vacuum. Her comments about maternity leave on Times Radio seemed utterly bizarre, even more so in that they were like clearly off the cuff. She just she went straight to her like, well, regulation is bad, and this is kind of a form of regulation to give, take money from businesses and give them to women who are having babies all over the place. She had to withdraw it. Do you think it's damaged her at all?
I think it's probably damaged her with the public. Mm-hmm. And therefore, off the back of that, it might have damaged her with her parliamentary colleagues, which is how she gets to the final round. I don't imagine for a moment it's damaged her with the members, among whom she's by far the most popular. So if she does make that final round, I think she's got a pretty good chance. As I understand it from people who are cleverer or closer to the Conservative Party than me, there is a good chance she doesn't make the final round because she's there's likely to be kind of like a right-wing candidate lane and a sort of stop the right-wing candidate lane. So you've got Jenrick and Badenoch on one side and Cleverly and Tugendhat on the other. There's going to be a distribution of votes from the Mel Stride, which, because he was also seen as being a centrist arm of the party, those are more likely to go to Tugendhat or Cleverly. And also Badenoch's just really bad with her colleagues. Like she just is not very clubbable, put it that way. I think
very mildly.
Yeah, like the thing that appeals to the members about her is that she talks, she says it like it is. Which means she goes around being like horrendously rude to people who disagree with her. The problem is she also does that to everybody else who comes into contact with her, even if they share an ideological backing or party membership. So she's not been very good at making friends in the parliamentary party, as I understand it, and that could be a problem. I mean, this is why David Miliband didn't win the Labour leadership in 2010, because he couldn't bring enough of his party colleagues with him. So I wouldn't be at all surprised if something similar happens.
That's very euphemistic. You couldn't bring the colleagues with him.
But that's not a small thing. The job is to manage the party in Parliament. If you can't do that, you can't really do the job, as we saw with Jeremy Corbyn.
Yeah.
So
the fact that her response to getting caught out on this crazy maternity leave stuff was to say that I don't shy away from saying hard truths. She said I was misrepresented. These are words that she spontaneously said in the radio. So I was misrepresented, and then I won't shy away from hard truths. So that means you kind of believe what you're saying. And also, it's a very weird thing to say at the same conference where the Centre for Policy Studies is launching a fringe meeting asking women to have more babies.
She always she blames the media first every time. Like she first kind of came to prominence, as I think we talked about on the show before, when she laid into the Huffington Post journalist Nadine White for asking her a question perfectly politely by email, maybe a bit brusque, but just literally doing her job. And instead of answering it, Badenoch went straight to Twitter to complain about how rude this journalist had been and how appalling it was.
She did it in the chamber of the House of Commons.
I think she sincerely dislikes journalists. And, I'm a journalist. A lot of my friends are journalists. I don't think that's irrational. A lot of people share that belief. But it is going to be a problem if you're leader of the opposition, which is another reason that maybe she shouldn't have the job.
Yes.
In terms of all this creepy Breathe for Britain stuff, the thing that always gets me about that is they always talk about the cultural values, don't they? They always talk about, is the problem feminism? Is the problem, woke teachers and lecturers kind of like putting ideas in people's heads? It's never like people literally can't afford to have a family because you haven't dealt with the problems of the housing market or the cost of childcare. They go to kind of cultural stuff as a comfort zone thing because that's much easier to talk about as a Conservative than, we bucketed up the economy for 14 years, didn't we?
There's a school of thought that says that people who tell the truth often ruffle feathers. Therefore, the more I offend people, the more I'm telling the truth. Are the Tories falling for that?
Oh, God, totally. It's like they are so not ready to have a conversation about why they actually lost. I do think there is this thing like people who describe themselves as plain spoken. It's like, I say it like I see it. It just means I go around being pointlessly fucking rude to people.
Yeah, I'm a Marmite person, but if everybody hated Marmite. Yeah.
But it's just like, they're not ready to kind of have the difficult conversation among themselves. Like the thing I have been enjoying watching this conference from afar is people live tweeting events with names like "What Went Wrong," which there are members standing up and saying, "Well, I think the problem is actually we didn't talk enough about all the good things we're doing," or like, "I think the problem is like the wokerati in the media or something." They're not at all. And there are members of the Conservative Party who I think all of us probably know some who do have a better grasp on the problems, who do know how badly they screwed it up. But they are not in the ascendancy in the party right now, because if you have a fairly democratic leadership election system, there is no incentive to talk the truth right now, because anybody who says, actually, guys, we were completely incompetent in office and the public don't agree with our ideas is not going to win over the membership. So why would you do that? So they're just going around lying to themselves. They've kind of weaponized that.
Well, this is why I want to ask you about the weird rise of Robert Jenrick, entirely, enormously charisma-free, previously anonymous. On our companion podcast, Paper Cuts, he's on the front of the Telegraph, and Miranda Zoya, the presenter, was like, "Who is that guy on the front of the Telegraph? He may well be the next leader of the Conservative Party." Somehow he's reinvented himself as this kind of, the fresh face of right-wing Tory politics. Somehow he's one of the frontrunners. How has this happened? It seems especially shameless.
So he was one of Rishi Sunak's closest allies, along with Oliver Dowden. When Sunak was still rising. At some point, Jenrick quit, I think, over the Rwanda thing.
Yes.
Having already established himself as kind of the sort of mean politician who wanted to paint over children's murals at an asylum centre, in case all those kind of foreign kids hear that they can see like a slightly wrong goofy on a wall somewhere in Kent, and therefore fight their way from Syria all the way across Europe just saying, look at it. He just was this incredibly nasty politician, but he quit early enough that he could say, well, when it all went wrong, it was nothing to do with me. And then he started, so he kind of pivoted from being like one of the more centrist ones to one of the more right-wing ones. Friends of Robert Jenrick, who may in fact have been Robert Jenrick, began briefing that he was the coming man. There was talk of a new Caesar haircut, which apparently means you're the next leader of the Conservative Party. There was talk of like, he was on a weight loss regime. They always talk when politicians lose weight, they always talk about leadership ambitions and never like, intestinal parasites. I've never.
Or Ozempic.
Yeah. Like, I mean, who knows? But yeah, so like to some extent, he just kind of did that pivot from the centre to the right at the right moment and got in early with just starting to brief that he was the next leader. And momentum will get you a long way in these things. Like to some extent, I think the votes for him are because people want to back a winner. What I keep coming back to, though, is an anecdote I've had from a number of sources at this point. It's also been in Potbitch that when he was a student at Cambridge, he ran for college president unopposed and lost.
Right.
He lost to Ron, reopened nominations.
Well, doesn't this mean that Ron becomes the leader of the Conservative Party now if Jenrick wins?
I mean, don't
human void.
Be careful what you wish for, because I think technically that would mean we'd have another leadership contest. Do we really want that?
Who even knows anymore?
Jenrick's campaign manager told a Fringe meeting that the Tories actually have to win a culture war to make young people recognize the significance and value of conservatism again, which seems like a bit of a strange argument considering the culture war kind of feels like an older person's game. Do we have any idea what he has in mind?
I mean, I'm not sure he does he? It's like, again, it's the comfort zone thing. It's just much easier to assume that the reason younger people tend to vote for left-wing parties is because they've been indoctrinated by woke teachers or lecturers rather than because of the economic fundamentals. Again, I know I do keep coming back to this and I start sounding like a self-parody, but I really think a lot of it is the housing market and the rest of it is the jobs market. It's like fundamentally the reason people have moved to the right historically is because they buy a house, they have a family, they, get a car and 2 kids and start going to garden centres. And suddenly, to become a conservative, you have to have something to conserve. But we've built this economy where wages aren't going up and it's really difficult to get on the housing ladder. So obviously people are continuing to have left-wing values into their 40s because they just do not have the economy hasn't worked for them. But the Conservative Party is clearly not ready to have that conversation with itself. So at the moment they just go, oh, it's teachers, obviously.
There's also this weird thing that Jenrick wants to display the Star of David at UK immigration to show Britain's support for Israel. It's a very strange signal to make. Is it a bit try-hard?
I'm finding this out for the first time, I have to say. And it's immensely creepy, isn't it? And I know, I have Jewish friends who complain that they find that kind of philo-Semitism quite creepy, like the adoption of someone else's identity as a marker in your own politics. And the idea like someone is just sticking up a symbol of Judaism to promote their own political career is a bit off, isn't it?
I'm sure this will be enormously finessed and quickly forgotten about as soon as possible because it's such a strange thing.
Also, I think arguably, if you're a great supporter of Israel, I think there are other ways that you would want the UK to support the country that doesn't involve just putting a Star of David on it to symbolize that. It's the most the cheapest, most weirdest
bumper sticker.
Yeah.
It is literally purely symbolism.
It's not all Badenoch and Jenrick at the conference. Jeremy Hunt has told conference that Labour's story of a £22 billion black hole is a lie. And in fact, the government has inherited a £32 billion surplus. He told an interview that he would have died to have had the legacy that Rachel Reeves has inherited. John, do you think we're seeing the beginning of economic gaslighting here from the Conservatives? It wasn't terrible. Actually, it was brilliant.
I mean, it's not the beginning. They've been doing it all along, haven't they? A couple of different things about this. Firstly, I suspect Jeremy Hunt believes it.
Yeah.
I mean, maybe not all of it, but I think he does genuinely think he will think more of his economic record than we do, surely.
Well, it's hard to think less, yes.
But I also think, like, you know, if we learned anything from the early 2010s, it's that, you know, you need to set your narrative. Like Labour kind of ceded that ground after they left office and let the Tories define it. And, you know, there is a reason like Rachel Reeves is talking about the black hole at every opportunity. So I think from a Tory point of view, I think retaliating on that and saying, no, it's brilliant, actually it's fine, is probably not a crazy thing to do. I don't think people are particularly going to believe it because people have lived in this economy and, you know, there is a reason they lost the election so badly. But nonetheless, I kind of get why he's doing it. And I think it probably is the right political strategy.
Yeah. Finally, I mean, I realise you just talked about Conservative Conference for 20 minutes and the future and where they're going. But ultimately, I mean, does it matter this time around? Are they going to have to basically lie fallow for 2 years before they can even begin to take their own problems seriously?
Yeah, probably. But does it matter? I mean, we live in very volatile times. I don't think it's the most likely outcome, but I would not completely bet against whoever wins this contest becoming Prime Minister in 5 years' time. Because, you know, look at the shift from 2019 to 2024. It's not inconceivable that there's a big shift back the other way if Labour just can't fix things or if, you know, unforeseen events go wrong. All bets are off. Who knows? Yeah. The other thing, I think we've not really talked about Cleverly or Toondat. And they're kind of, to some extent, the least interesting and probably the least likely to win. But I do think it is worth remembering that it does seem likely the final two that go to the members will be one from each lane, one from the right, one from the centre. So it doesn't completely rule them out. And also, like, both Jenrick and Badenoch are the kinds of politicians who might implode on contact with the voters in a way I don't think, like, neither of the other two are kind of, they're not, I'm not the target market, but Cleverly is quite liked and respected by the people he works with. Toondat does have he's not risen to such heights, but he's apparently very personable. I don't think either of those guys have quite as many off-putting characteristics either. So I do think it's at least possible one of them does kind of make it through.
Well, I guess we'll be looking at the result around Halloween in an episode we will definitely be calling Trick or Treat.
Hello, I'm Dorian Linsky.
And I'm Ian Dunn.
We're the hosts of the podcast Origin Story, and we've got a live show coming up at the Tabernacle in West London on November the 7th.
It's 2 days after the American elections. We'll be taking stock of what, in the name of God, has just happened. So come be with friends, whether it's good news or whether it's bad news.
It's also doubling as the official launch party of the Origin Story season of books, which begins with fascism, centrism, and conspiracy theory, some of which may be relevant to the US election. The books will already be out by then, but this is your chance to meet the authors, God forbid, and get us to sign your copy with our own physical hands.
We'll see you there.
Now, the return of our regular little bit called Heroes and Villains, the bit where our panellists nominate a hero and a villain each from the Politics Extended Universe, and I get to choose who gets the accolade for this week. Yasmin, who's your hero for the week and who's your villain for the week?
So my hero for the week is Chapel Roan. The pop
Explain who Chapel Roan is for some of our older listeners.
So I even feel too old really to be a fan of hers, but I am. But she's this pop singer who has been around, I think, as I understand it, for a few years. But I feel like she's really kind of started topping the charts and it's kind of become very popular.
She's having a moment.
Yeah, this is her moment. It's happening now. And with moments comes intense scrutiny. And she's recently come under scrutiny because I believe it was in an interview with The Guardian, actually, which did a very good profile of her. She kind of talked about how she wasn't going to be endorsing Kamala Harris and kind of was voicing sort of problems that she has with politics and political parties. And she came under fire for that. And, you know, it's not surprising, I guess, in the context of the fact that this is an election where Donald Trump is on the ballot. And I think we still very much live in a universe where people take anything less than like a full-throated endorsement of the opponent to mean an endorsement for Trump, which, to clarify, she has categorically said she's not voting for the man. But I think the reason I've chosen her as my hero is because I think she's articulated something that feels very relatable which is being an American, voting at this time, recognizing that, that you have these political parties that, frankly, haven't really earned an endorsement. Like you're going to vote, you're going to pick a lane at some stage, but that that a lot of voters have some pretty significant issues, including with the Democratic Party and kind of their handling. In her case, she said she put down her decision to not endorsing Harris to the Biden-Harris administration's failure to robustly defend queer rights in the face of hundreds of anti-LGBTQ plus bills tabled by Republicans, as well as its handling of the ongoing war in Gaza. Now, those can be quite relatable things. And she basically encouraged her supporters and her fans, of which there are many, to vote and to kind of think about what they vote and to vote locally, to vote on issues that are very local to them. So, she wasn't saying don't vote. She wasn't saying I dislike these people, but she was kind of just making this, this argument that like voting is a very personal thing. And I think to demand endorsements, which I think are fundamentally earned of pop stars, is kind of a lot. Like you see some people doing that. Taylor Swift, for example, endorsed, which is great. More power to her. But yeah, I just felt like she came under a lot of fire for a pretty silly reason. So for that, she is my hero.
Okie doke.
And because I love Pink Pony Club. Anyway, my villain is also kind of from the sort of pop culture world. And it's Russell Brand.
Oh,
but for a very, very specific reason, which is that I really shouldn't be scrolling Twitter X as much as I do anyway. But when I go onto the app and I'm faced with a photo of him in his pants baptizing someone in a river, that's just where I'm like, I don't know what's happening here. He appears to just have a Jesus complex. So I was like, you know what?
Even Jesus didn't have a Jesus complex like this. Jesus was a pretty humble guy.
Yeah.
Also, Jesus hadn't done all of the things that allegedly, So, yes, very, very strong argument there, Yasmin. Thank you for that. John, hero and villain.
I'm going to do villain first. Today, Monday, there's been a lot of heartbreaking, I would say, heartrending too, stories about Jonathan Gullis.
Oh,
Do you
no.
remember him? He was kicked out of Parliament in the election. He used to be a teacher and he's not been able to get another job in a school.
Is it because of woke?
He thinks it's because of woke. Yes, he said there's a lot of schools that we see who I used to represent and maybe my views, which they may not like. And because of that, not because of what I can do as a teacher, but because of that, I won't even be given an interview. Now, I can think of another couple of possible explanations, one of which was the election was held on July 4th, which was a point at which I imagine most schools already had their teaching roster for the next academic year sorted out. Another of which is we've all seen a fair amount of evidence of Jonathan Gullis's personality, which entirely separate from his political views, may count as a reason why you would not want to employ him or work near him. But he thinks it's because of woke, so I'm calling him my villain of the week.
I would actually, however, watch the hilarious comedy drama Mr. Gullis Goes Back to School, where he gets put in the most horrible school you can lay your hands on, and the kids just throw stuff at him. I would watch that comedy drama.
You know that story that went round that the kids in his class used to wind him up by writing C in front of his name? And he'd get really angry about that. Anyway, we only wish him well, and to find a job a long way from the
Jonathan Livingston Seagullis.
Yeah.
Yes, and
my hero, I struggled a bit. It's depressing out there. I was tempted to say Derek Anderson, who is running as a Republican in the Virginia 7th, the Congress. He doesn't have a wife and kids, so he's borrowed a friends that pop up in all their pictures.
What, rent a wife?
Boy.
And as a single guy of a certain age myself, I mean, it's but that's far too deeply creepy. So instead, I'm going to go with a company called Uncle and Me LLC, because they put on an unlicensed Bridgerton ball in Detroit. And it's this season's answer to the Fire Festival or the Willy Wonka experience. There's talk of cold, soggy noodles and chicken wings, and my favourite, a pole dancer. And I just think we need these stories to kind of keep morale up. So they're my hero.
I've never seen Bridgerton. I had no idea. I'm going to watch it all now. I'm going to binge it. It's got pole dancing and noodles involved.
It absolutely doesn't. I'm told.
Well, I'm disgusted and shocked. I'm afraid it's a clean sweep for Yasmin today. Chapel Roan is the hero and Russell Brand is the villain. But thank you for bringing those wonderful stories to our attention. I'm sure the listeners will take them to their hearts.
That Bridgerton thing horrifies me now that I know. They played the Bridgerton soundtrack at my citizenship ceremony.
Did they?
They did. And
that's like fake Britain. That's like not real Britain.
I kind of like that they leaned into it. That was quite cute.
They should have played the music from Upstairs Down. Actually, they should have played the music from Only Fools and Horses.
They should have played the Doctor Who theme tune.
Caroline.
We know that.
The national anthem.
The national anthem of Britain, the Doctor Who theme tune, yes. Hezbollah is expecting a ground attack by Israel into Lebanon. Iran insists that Israel will not go unpunished for the assassination and its attendant collateral damage. And Israel has bombed Houthi targets in Yemen. Beyond the bloodshed in Gaza, Lebanon and Israel itself, analysts are saying that Iran's plans for an axis of resistance against Israel are foundering. So what does this new phase mean, and are we anywhere nearer to the end of this horror show? Yasmin, firstly, the assassination of Hassan Nasrallah. Who was he? How major is this?
Yeah, so Hassan Nasrallah was, of course, the longtime leader of Hezbollah, and he kind of led the group, which is a very powerful Lebanese Shia militant group, but also political grouping or faction in Lebanon for 3 of the last 4 decades of its existence. So he's been a very, very significant figure in the organization's history. And just as a bit of background, the organization came into existence in 1982 in response to Israel's invasion and occupation of southern Lebanon. So it's, it's the whole kind of the ethos of the group is very much rooted in its opposition to Israel, but also kind of by extension its opposition to the U.S. as well. However, I think what we also saw under Nasrallah's tenure was that Hezbollah actually kind of acted really beyond Lebanon's borders. So I think the most prominent example was that Hezbollah dispatched fighters into Syria to support Syrian President Bashar al-Assad. So if you saw reports that some Syrians were celebrating in the aftermath of his assassination, that will be why. And I believe they were also kind of involved with Iran's militia allies in Yemen and Iraq as well. But I think the way we think of Hezbollah as an organization today, and particularly within this moment, was that in the kind of immediate aftermath of Hamas's October 7th attack on Israel, Hezbollah launched rockets into Israel as kind of a show of solidarity with Hamas. And they've kind of, a lot of these rockets were kind of ineffectual in that, we didn't, this wasn't where the main fighting was. The main fighting had happened in Gaza. But of course, over the past year, people, Israelis living in kind of the northern border communities with Lebanon have been displaced for the past year. And indeed, a lot of Lebanese living near the south were also displaced. So, there was enough fighting to cause concern, but it was never anything, I guess, full blown, you would say. The fact that his assassination comes amid this kind of very intense few weeks for the group. Of course, the pager explosions that we saw from a few weeks ago. And now the kind of, the killing of much of its military leadership is, of course, very significant. And under his tenure, Nasrallah really made Hezbollah a really effective deterrent against kind of any Israeli action in Lebanon. And indeed, kind of by extension, Iran as well. It was seen as sort of a very powerful deterrent. Now that Israel's kind of been able to wipe out significant amounts of its leadership and members in a significant way, kind of calls into question whether it will continue to be that. I think most analysts would say that, that this doesn't mean that Hezbollah is completely out for the count. It had a lot of members and a pretty big arsenal. But it's clearly been decimated in a big way. So, it's very significant. And I think the question that everyone kind of has is what comes next.
Yeah, well, it was an overwhelmingly, devastatingly powerful attack. Over 1,000 bombs, including US munitions, 2,000-pound bombs, according to The Guardian. Hezbollah say 300 people may have been killed. Lebanon's official count was 11 with 108 wounded. Israel said it killed more than 20 members of Hezbollah. And that Nasrallah had intentionally built Hezbollah's central headquarters under residential buildings. It's very difficult to know what's going on when you're getting information from lots of different sources. I don't think anybody I'm not sure too many people will personally mourn Nasrallah because he's got a lot of blood on his hands. But, as you say, the big question is what happens next. Does the fact that such a devastating attack has taken out the key leader, along with parallel attacks who've taken out other serious senior members of Hezbollah, we see that Israel has been making sallies into Lebanon, and Hezbollah is apparently ready for a full ground offensive. Does this look like that there is going to be a ground war into Lebanon now?
So actually, Israel reportedly informed the U.S. today that they're preparing for a limited ground incursion into Lebanon that could happen even now as we're speaking on Monday. So, it seems that's kind of what people expected, and it seems all but certain now that Israel will send troops into Lebanon, which of course is a very significant step historically and just kind of given everything that's happening now. In terms of kind of what Israel says with regard to kind of its reasoning for doing this, I mean, it's very much mirrors what it said with regard to Hamas in Gaza, that, they purposefully position themselves in civilian centers. I think what's clear in both the Lebanese and the Gaza context is that these are densely populated areas. Dropping those size bombs on a city like Beirut and in South, I mean, invariably there's going to be a lot of collateral damage. So if this is the style of fight, I guess, that Israel wants to take on, I think it seems all but certain that Israel is going to go in. I guess the question is, what is a limited incursion? How are they defining that? And what is their end game here, right? Because if the end game is getting rid of Hezbollah and getting rid of that threat, then kind of very similar to the end game of sort of decimating Hamas, one has to question whether that's actually an achievable goal. And yeah, I think that really remains to be seen.
How in the pocket of Iran or Hezbollah? I mean, does what happen next or what their response is pretty much entirely depend on what Iran wants?
Iran is Hezbollah's main sponsor. So I think certainly they're very much connected. And I think it's precisely because of that closeness that Iran's supreme leader has reportedly been taken into hiding. So I think there's perhaps a concern even on Iran's part that if Hezbollah was, they've been infiltrated in the way that they very clearly were, perhaps the same could be happening there. So they're very much connected. I think the question, though, is how Iran chooses to respond. I admittedly am not as much of an expert on Iran, but I will kind of just read a bit from this great report that was in The Economist, which said that they also worry about how a public show of support for groups like Hezbollah might affect their standing at home. Faced with growing discontent over a moribund economy, the regime does not want to be seen investing more resources in a proxy that seems to be losing its war against Israel. So that isn't to say that Iran won't respond, that it won't feel the need to respond. But I think the fact that we haven't seen anything immediate is perhaps a suggestion that they are taking time and thinking.
So like the killing of Nasrallah provoked this sort of euphoria in Israel. And it's not just from the sort of hardline right, like more liberal people as well are like, well, he's not a good guy. Is it possible? Like, is there any hope that we're a step closer to the end of the violence and that this is something that could actually lead to a de-escalation rather than just like let more of this stuff? Yeah,
I mean, that's a question that's been on my mind a lot as I've been sort of writing and reporting around sort of what comes next. And unfortunately, I fear that we are no closer to an end of anything, in large part because I don't see the incentive for an end when it comes to the Israeli domestic factor and specifically Benjamin Netanyahu. I mean, I think what we've seen over the past year, which has been made evidently clear throughout his career, but I think especially now, is that Benjamin Netanyahu primarily acts in his own self-interest. And, so long as he's in government and so long as there's a war and they're pursuing those really hardline aims, really kind of decimating Gaza in the process, and indeed now going into Lebanon, I think Netanyahu's calculus is that he can therefore remain in power and kind of remain somewhat immune from the litany of political issues that he has, including those alleged corruption charges. So, it's hard to really come to the conclusion that we're nearing a kind of end because we also just really don't see what the end game is for him. They've established returning the people of Israel from the north back to their homes who've been displaced for a year as one of their war aims. Perhaps going into Lebanon and dealing with Hezbollah as they're trying to do now will kind of achieve that. But when it comes to completely decimating Hamas, I mean, that's already been clear that hasn't been achieved. Certainly the U.S. and others would say that it's been done to a level where they have achieved that aim. But I think the ball is really in Netanyahu's court. And certainly between now and November 5th, I think he's going to feel as though he can act with free rein. Because certainly now, I think the Biden administration is not going to do it. They haven't really done anything anyway, but they're not going to do anything now. And I think he'll probably want to bide his time and see what happens with the election. Certainly, if Trump comes into power, he could reasonably think that he's going to be given even more space to kind of do as he wants. With Harris, I mean, who knows? It really depends on whether she wants to kind of continue the Biden policy. But the Biden policy insofar is to kind of urge de-escalation, but not really do anything to bring it about. The Israeli government line, even insofar as kind of everything that's been happening in Lebanon, is to de-escalate through escalation. which sounds a lot like eating donuts for fat loss. I mean, I just don't really, understand. And I don't think anyone does. And certainly anyone who's following this kind of hears that and thinks, I don't think you're de-escalating anything. So the answer, unfortunately, is I don't know. But to be honest, I don't see any of this ending anytime soon.
We're at the end of this edition of Oh God, What Now? Which means escape routes. What are the books, music, TV, films, whatever, miscellaneous, that are keeping us sane away from the world of politics? John Elledge, what's your escape route at the moment?
So a few months ago, a trailer came out and was widely mocked for a big budget BBC thriller about a train that can't be stopped. Called Night Sleeper.
Did you think this was about a new train line that can't be stopped by NIMBYs and it's about just building infrastructure?
That would be amazing. But no, sad. I mean, it wouldn't be very dramatic. But but no, it is. I mainlined it all last week. It's mainlined. It is. I mean, it's one of those things.
This is Night Sleeper, yeah?
Yeah, Night Sleeper. It is objectively terrible, but it's the most fun I've had in ages. It is, and I think they know what they're doing. Like, they have every cliche in the book there. None of the tech makes any sense, but they've spent a long time looking at maps of the British Rail network. So there's really dramatic moments where they say things like, "It's on the Settle to Carlisle line." It's brilliant, honestly. It will make you happy.
It's like action for train spotters. The thing is, the only thing I know about it, firstly, Night Sleeper. When else do you sleep? You know what I mean? It's like police cops.
Yeah, that's exactly what it is. This is why I think they know they're taking the piss.
But also, the only thing I know about it is, like, if you don't stop this train, it's going to destroy Euston Station. And anybody that goes to it's like, yay, blow up Euston Station, it's shit, build the old one again with the arch. Yes. Okay. So you're saying that this is an addictive train-based action thing.
It is absolutely joyous. It is so much fun.
Okay. Right. I might give it a go. Yasmin, what's yours? Has it got trains in it?
No. My escape route is a film that I actually went to a screening of last week, and I believe it's just entered theaters in UK and Ireland. It's called The Teacher. It's the latest film project by the Academy Award nominated British Palestinian filmmaker and director Farah Nabulsi. It's set in the West Bank. It was filmed, I want to say, in 2022, so it doesn't encompass all of what we just discussed previously. But it's an incredibly moving film that I think really just, I mean, if you want to have an understanding of what the reality of life in the West Bank is like, you should watch this film. It has an incredible cast. It's, equal parts dramatic, with some also just really moving, this incredible relationship between this teacher and one of his students. There are some themes that kind of will be very familiar to listeners, probably about like hostage taking and stuff like that. But it's very, very good. It is in theaters now. I would encourage everyone to go watch it. I was in tears multiple times. So that's
The Teacher. Okay.
The Teacher.
Well, mine, because I'm captain last with everything, is a book that came out in 2015. It was recommended to me by Alexis Petridis in The Guardian. He's got very good taste. It's called Rendezvous at the Russian Tea Rooms, with the subtitle The Spy Hunter, the Fashion Designer and the Man from Moscow, written by Paul Willits. This is a meticulously researched, true story, absolutely insane story about fascist sympathisers in Britain at the very beginning of the Second World War, all in the orbit of the kind of Oswald Mosley tendencies, lots of kind of, titled right-wingers. And it's the story of how a corrupt American intelligence official who is working sort of tangentially with the Russians falls in with a fascist Russian fashion designer. This is all true stuff. She's the daughter of Russian emigres, all centered around the Russian tea rooms. And the spy hunter who goes after them, who is a fantastically charismatic fellow who is absolutely entranced by wildlife. He keeps budgies and monkeys in his flat in Dolphin Square, which is a very posh bit of London. And the story is, because it's assembled from first-hand sources, Paul Willits has an incredible contrast of material. So he'll be telling you what's going on with the intelligence reports on British fascist cells across London during the blackout in the early days of the Second World War. And then he'll go into what's going on in the world of fashion, what's happening with hemlines, what's happening with hats, what's going on with lace, because he's built it all up from the world's primary information on the worlds of all these three characters. Also, a mad thing that recurs in the book frequently is you'll discover that this particular Russian emigre was the great aunt of Helen Mirren, of course, or that the young boy witnessing the arrest of this fascist in a mews house near the Royal Albert Hall, well, that boy grew up to be Len Dayton. All these insane things. I recommend it enormously, absolutely gripping. Rendezvous at the Russian tea rooms. And one thing that really stood out to me was that the world of pre-war fascists in Britain was full of strange, frustrated, mediocre people and fantasists and oddballs and failed actors and weird painters. And I'm looking at it going, my God, it's now. All of the weird right-wingers of now are exactly the same. The core thing to them is, well, I'm an interesting person. Aren't I unusual? Aren't I strange with my fascinations? And it really just resonated with now. So I recommend it hugely. And that's the end of this edition of Oh God, What Now? Thank you, Yasmin Serhan.
Thank you.
Thank you, John Elledge.
Thank you very much.
We will be back at the end of the week with another edition. Don't forget, tickets to our next live show in Hove, actually, on October the 9th, are still on sale. And don't forget, if you enjoyed this podcast and you want to keep us firing on all cylinders, nothing helps like a Patreon pledge. Your £3, £5, £10 a month, whatever, is worth literally thousands of ad impressions to us. So sign up to get extended versions of the podcast and no ads. Links are in the show notes, or just search Patreon, Oh God, What Now? And if you sign up, you'll also get the fabled shout out on the pod, like these good people.
A salute across the digital network from me to new backers, Samshi, Mike Miller, and Roland.
Many thanks and a manly bear hug from me to Michael Lorio, Ben Dawson, and Ewan Mitchell. Although I assume not the Ewan Mitchell who I'm enjoying so much in House of the Dragon at the moment.
It might be. It might be. We've got all the good people. Finally, a high five, a fist bump, and a traditional handshake from me to Daniel Thackeray, Claire Ellsworth, and Mate, M-A-I-T. All right, mate? Thank you to all of you. We'll see you next time.